you can see me and hear me okay, just pop something into the comment section just below, just before we get started. I think we're live now, so let me just see if lighting wise we're okay here. So cool, good, I think we're live, so let's get started. So the purpose of this live is really for you to be able to ask whatever questions you have on property, so I can help you with whatever property investing questions that you might have. So we run these for about half an hour. I've been doing these regularly on a Monday, Monday at 8:30. So if you pop your question, I'll try and answer that. I've got a few questions left over that are unanswered at the moment, so I'll work through those first. And if you put your question in the messages or the comment section, then we'll pick up those and try and get those answered for you as well. If I'm unable to get them finished, then hopefully I'll jump onto them next Monday, 8:30, and do those. So if you want your question answered, make sure you enter it nice and early so I've got time to get it done. So the first question is from David Yamo. I'm not sure what platform this is on, but the question was, would I have 3 HMOs on the same road? So just to put a bit of context around that, I actually have got properties where we've got a number of properties on the same street. And I think that can be a good thing for a number of reasons. It gives, say, economies of scale where some things can be done easier. For example, let's say you've got a room there that holds bedding and storage. You can have one of those rooms, say, shared among several properties that you just keep for general storage, say for yourself. Access for cleaners is easier. They can just walk from property to property. There can be many reasons why it'd be beneficial to have properties together in one place. Now, I think the angle of the question is more so around maybe oversupply. It could be too many properties together on the one street. I think ultimately this comes down to what the demand is for the type of accommodation that you're providing. So if you're providing good quality, competitive accommodation in an area where there's relatively good demand, then there should be absolutely no reason whether you've got a house on one street or you've got 3 on one street, that should make much of a difference. Whether on one street or whether they're 100 yards away, as long as there's a good demand in that area, reality is I can't see any reason why it would be an issue having properties together. In fact, I'd love the idea of having 2 properties side by side. Even the gardens I can open up to make one big garden between the 2. So I think there's a lot of benefits in doing that. So hopefully, David, that answers your question. Next question is from Shai Lau. The question is, I'm looking at cash flow strategies. What would you suggest to expedite the cash flow, and can it be done with no money down or minimum money in for? So the question really is around getting started, I'm assuming. So I don't have a lot of context to these questions. So I'm just going from the question that I have. So I think when you get started in property, and if you're looking for cash flow, if you're looking to generate cash flow quite quickly, I think there's 3 key methods of doing that. The first one, they're not in any particular order, but I'm just going to run through in this order. The first one would be, say, rent to rent or rent to HMO. So what you're doing, you're taking a standard property, converting it into a HMO, and you're subletting the rooms individually, so that the landlord that you're paying, the rent that you're paying to your landlord rather, is one amount, and then you're subletting the rooms out for significantly more as a collective figure, and then you're making the profit between. Of course, you've got the running costs, the utilities, etc., that you're dealing with, but you're still making a profit ultimately. So that's one strategy. So before I explain a bit more about that, let me talk about strategy number 2. Strategy number 2 would be rent to service accommodation. So the difference essentially between those 2 is you still don't own the property. You're taking on a property where you're paying a monthly rent for, and then you're reletting the property out. But because you're letting it out on a shorter window, i.e. you're not having standard 6-month tenancies at the property, what you can do is charge a premium for the shorter stays. And it's more about providing a complete service rather than just accommodation. So for example, if you're staying at a hotel, you're not living there, but you're utilizing services of the convenience of being there, a cleaner coming in, changing the bedding, etc., etc., for you, all that taken care of. So the short stays means that you can create more income than what you might be paying out to the landlord. So the rent to HMO, rent to service accommodation, the two most common fast cash flow strategies that you might want to use. In terms of how much you need to get started, well, they'll vary depending on where you are, the type of properties. Let's talk about some of the costs that you might incur. When you're taking any of these properties on, you might end up paying a deposit. I say might because many of these things are negotiable. They're not set in stone. You may pay a deposit that the landlord or the agent wants before they let you have the property. You'll probably have a month's rent that you'll need to pay, your first month's rent in advance. Again, I say probably because you could negotiate it to pay at the end of the month rather than in advance, which is the norm. So you've got the rent to pay, and then you have some setup costs. Your setup costs will be things like, for example, furnishing the property, maybe any conversion compliance costs, for example, fire door, fire alarms, if it was that type of property, appliances, if you need those, washing machine, dishwasher, etc., microwave, toaster, kettle. You might have other furniture apart from bedroom furniture, such as dining table, sofa, coffee table, TV, etc. All these are part of your setup costs. These are things that you might need to buy into the property, but it may be that they already have them there. It might be it's already furnished or part furnished. Or you could have other costs, which may be some redecorating of the property, changing the carpets and the floor coverings. These are all things you could end up having to pay for if you're taking a property on that you want to use on a rent-to-rent basis. Now, as I said, not all of these are necessary costs. So in terms of how much you'll need, depends on how you negotiate the deal, what kind of deal that you strike. And it could be that you have a rent-free period where you're not actually paying any money for the property because you're investing money in the property. For instance, let's say you're taking on a property, it needs to be redecorated and carpeted, and let's say that's going to be £4,000 for argument's sake, and let's say you're paying £1,000 a month. It could be that you negotiate, you'll do that work, but that will come off the rent, so you're not paying any rent for say for 4 months. Yeah, or it could be that you agree with the landlord that they need to do that for you before you take the property on. Now, in my experience, what you find is the more the property is ready to go and the less you need to do, the more you'll probably end up paying for that property. If you want to get the rent right down at a lower rent, sometimes below market rent, it may be that you're having to do more of the work up front. So these are some of the costs that you need to think about when you're taking on a property on a rent-to-rent basis, and hence they can be a low cash in and a high cash flow property. So typically on properties like this, you should be generating an absolute minimum, in my mind, of £500, going to probably up to about £1,000 for example, like a 6-bedroom HMO on a rent-to-rent basis. The third strategy that you can use in terms of a relatively fast cash flow or getting started and low money in is sourcing deals. This is where you're sourcing deals, you're finding them with other people, you're packaging them up and passing them on to other people. So when you get set up, you've got a little bit of compliance stuff to deal with in terms of just making sure that you're doing things correctly, about how you're packaging deals up and offering them to other people. But effectively what you're doing, you're getting paid for your time to go out and find opportunities that you are then offering other people who will pay you a fee. What will that fee be? Well, it can be whatever you want it to be, but ultimately it's about how much value that you're bringing to somebody. So for example, let's say you've got a property worth £100,000 and you've sourced it and agreed a purchase price of, let's say, £70,000. So you've got 30% below market value, a substantial discount. What fee would you charge for that? Well, you could charge £2,000, £3,000, £5,000. I think you'd probably be able to get that. But if you start to charge £10,000, I think maybe that you might not actually get that. And depending on the amount of packaging work that you're doing, will also then relate to what's a fair fee. And these things are all negotiable, so you can set your fee. If you're a very good source of finding great deals and there's very few other people able to find those type of deals, then you can charge more, just simply by looking at the supply and demand, the economics of there's very few deals around, you're finding them, so you can charge a higher price for those. So ultimately, your three strategies in getting started with property without having to need too much money upfront and cash flowing quite quickly. So hopefully that helps. So I'll jump on next question. I've got a few here. Let me just grab one of these. This question is from Kabir. Kabir's question is, how many beds would you take on? Is there a limit you go for? I'm guessing, and I'm not sure, and if this, I think this is on Facebook, maybe if Kabir, you could just clarify what you mean by that. Do you mean in terms of taking on a property on a rent-to-rent basis, number of bedrooms on service accommodation, or is it how many I would create within a HMO? Just give us a bit more context, and I'll come back to that question then in a moment. So Eleni Sophia on LinkedIn's question is, any advice for first-time buyer, someone who doesn't want to use the Help to Buy scheme? So if you're purchasing your first home, I mean, mostly what we're talking about is property investing. So it tends to be a property you're purchasing not to live in yourself, but to make money from, to create an income from that property. But let's say you're looking at a property to purchase for yourself. Generally, you'll be able to get a higher loan-to-value mortgage. So what that means is you could probably get a 90 or a 95% mortgage, whereas most property investors, their buy-to-let mortgages are around 75%. So what does that mean? Well, if it's a £100,000 property, as a property investor, you need to put down about £25,000. You have more stamp duty to pay as well. If you're purchasing it as a home, you'll have a lower stamp duty figure to pay, if anything at all, and possibly a smaller deposit with a larger percentage of mortgage that you're taking on. Of course, there's many other factors such as your income as well that needs to be considered for how much you can actually borrow. The Help to Buy scheme is a kind of loan arrangement where the government is giving you a loan to be able to get the property purchased. So you need less cash to get started on the property. And of course, you could have friends, family that are giving you some money to kind of help you out and getting started as well. When you're purchasing it as a home, you're much more limited in the choices and options and the creative kind of deals you can do as a property investor. But the other thing that I would consider thinking about is, depending on the size of property that you're purchasing, it may be you could have a lodger that you're letting out one of the rooms to somebody to create an extra income as well, because most of what we're talking about is how to create an income from property. So Elena, hopefully that's useful. Purchasing your first properties is probably not really what we're focusing on. It's really about property investors, second, third, and fourth properties, because the strategies are quite different. It's not the same strategies that apply. So has Kabir come back at all, or not yet? Okay. YouTube. So YouTube, I've got a question from Imran Shah. What area is best to invest? Imran, that's like asking how long is a piece of string. You've got to give me a little bit more context in terms of what type of investing you want to do, whether it's purchasing a property, renovating and selling, whether it's something for building up long-term capital on properties, where you're just letting out to a family and creating a smaller profit each month, but long-term capital growth, or whether you're, for example, wanting to maximize the amount of money you can generate from a property, for example, maybe creating into a HMO. So if you can give me a little bit more context about what you mean, then I'll try and answer that question for you. So coming back to Kabir's question, I'm losing track of questions here. Let me just get rid of that one, then that one, come back to that one. So Kabir's question around how many beds would you take on, is there a limit for you to go, is answered in terms of a rent-to-rent HMO. So Kabir, it depends on the type of tenants that you'll have in that property. So who is it that you're creating this product for? So think about it from a marketing perspective. You're creating something that you're taking to the marketplace and asking people to purchase. And what is that? You're creating a room, you're creating accommodation for somebody to come and rent from you. So you got to think about who is that typical customer going to be, what expectations do they have? So for instance, if you're letting to professional tenants or white collar tenants, or sometimes the way I describe them is maybe people that go to work and sit at a desk on a higher salary. If that's your target client, for instance, it may be that if you are in a 4, 5 or 6 bedroom house, they're okay sharing. It may even be that they were previously a student at, say, university, and they're used to the idea of living with other people, having some shared facilities such as a lounge, kitchen, maybe bathrooms as well. Now, if you then look from a numbers perspective, what is viable because ultimately from an investment point of view, or as the investor, or as a business, because I'm a renter, you don't actually own the property, but as a business, how you can actually make money from that, how you're going to create cash flow for yourself, you're looking at what's going to work numbers wise. Now, in my experience, 6 is what works really well. And the reason 6 works really well for me is because the first 2 rooms will generally cover the cost of either your rent, if it's a rent to rent, or maybe your mortgage payments, if it's a purchased property. The 3rd room will probably cover the costs of your running costs. What are your running costs? Gas, electric, water, council tax, TV license, cleaners, gardeners. These are your running costs that you'll have on the property. You've got also management, maintenance, and voids to think about as well. But overall, the 3 properties pretty much will mean, the 3 rooms will mean that your costs are covered. The 4th room becomes your profit. Now, let's say you've got a void for a few weeks where somebody's not in that property, they're moving out, or you've got somebody that's not paying rent, then very quickly you're into a no money making situation, or worse still, losing money on that particular property. So going up to 5 and 6 starts making it more profitable because your base costs are fixed. Your running costs are not going to be that different on a 4-bedroom versus a 6-bedroom property. 6-bedroom, again, depending on where you are in the country, generally speaking, you can do without requiring full planning permission. It tends to be a permitted development or a change of use from what's called a C3 residential property to a C4 HMO up to 6 people. We talk about bedrooms, but this is about the number of occupants, not actually the number of bedrooms. Although when we're having a conversation, often people just refer to them as bedrooms, but it's actually about the number of people living in the property. So when you've got 6, room 5 is profit, room 6 is profit, so it works really well. So why not go 7, 8, 9, and 10? Well, firstly, once you go past 6, you then require planning permission to change it then to its current use, to sui generis, which tends to be beyond 6 people living in a house. That could be 7, 8, 10, 12, 15, whatever it might be. So you need to go through the planning permission to be able to do that, depending on, again, where you are in the country and the appetite for that kind of thing from your local authority, whether they would support something like that, and also possibly the months it will take to go through that process and get that change as well and get up and running. So that's the practicalities of getting it set up. Now, if you are purchasing from a finance point of view, it's actually the bigger it is, the more profitable it tends to appear on paper, which means generally you get higher valuation in terms of what the property's worth. But from a practical habitation point of view, you have to think about, if you've got, say, 10 people in one house, how is that going to work? Is it going to feel like this is some kind of a commune as opposed to a room they're renting in a shared house, the few people that might know? When there's 10 or so people, I see sometimes working in student houses when they're that size, because the kind of social demographics are different. But when we think about professional lets, personally, I think when you start going to those sizes, it makes it very difficult to run. So we've got one house that we manage in our HMO letting agency in Birmingham, where I think it's licensed for 17 people, if I remember correctly. And it's a nightmare trying to run the house. It's not one of mine. It's one another landlord brought to us to manage for them. I think it can be so difficult to try and get everybody to get on and not have any issues, because it's about a shared house. It's about a social space. And I think that's where the challenge happens. So think about who it is you're creating this product for. What would they want? Often some tenants will want to share with as less people as possible, but obviously from a financial point of view, it doesn't make sense for us. We want to be beyond 4 as an absolute minimum, and I'd say 6 is really where you want to be. And remember things like Article 4, where if you're in Article 4 area, what that means is in that area they've removed the permitted development rights to be able to take a normal C3 house and convert it to C4. You'd have to go through planning permission, just like you have to go through planning permission, say, for 7 or 8 person house. So if you're in Article 4 area, you need to consider that as well. So I hope that helps. It's not just about the pure numbers, whether the numbers work. It's about thinking about, is it practical? Is it desirable? Is it going to rent? If half the time the property is empty or half the rooms are empty, it's just not very popular, or people not getting on, or you've got all kinds of issues you have to deal with, then even if it looked great on paper, when you're adding up all those cells on the Excel spreadsheet of all the rents you're going to get, in practice it may not work so well. Hopefully that helps with that, Kabir. Let me put one down here. I've did that one. I've got these. This one I've got on YouTube. Shakiru Shonkan, apologies for my pronunciation, hopefully that was correct. How best can you know that an area have good demand for service accommodation? Best place to get legal documents for rent-to-rent agreement. So two parts to that question. Firstly, how do you identify an area is going to work for service accommodation? Again, just like earlier when I was speaking to Kabir, it's about thinking about who is your product for? Who are you creating this for? And is there a demand from that type of person for the accommodation that you're providing in that location? So I think one of the easiest ways to try and identify an area that will work for service accommodation is think about hotels. Hotels exist, and there's some often huge buildings. How often do you see a small hotel? It's quite rare. They generally tend to accommodate quite a lot of rooms. And before they build these, that cost multiple millions of pounds to build these hotels, they spend a lot of money on researching, is there going to be a demand for that hotel in that location before they put it up and take it on. Now, so they've done the hard work and they've established there's this demand for this type of accommodation. It's a little bit like, so let's say you wanted to put together some kind of fast food restaurant, and you're thinking about where to put it. Well, if you've got a McDonald's and a KFC nearby, pretty much they have done the homework for you. They know that there's an established demand for this type of for these types of outlets. So that means if you appeared there, you're not necessarily going to be competing with them directly. There might be a little bit of fringe competition going on, but ultimately they know there's a demand for the product in that area. In the same way, you've got to look at the hotels, what type of hotels exist, and how much do they charge for accommodation, the type of accommodation they provide. You can look at all this online to get a sense for what's available there. And that can give you a feeling for, actually, is service accommodation going to work there? If you provide accommodation for similar kinds of people, what price point can you do that at, and can you make the numbers work? I think that's one of the safest ways to do your research. Another way, of course, is using the big portals like booking.com and Airbnb, jumping on those and looking at what else is already in the areas that you're thinking of. So if there's a particular location, you can go search on that location for accommodation to stay for 2 or 3 nights and see what comes up, see what prices they're charging for that, see what reviews they've had, how long they've been running, how far ahead their bookings are already in the calendar, how many bookings they have in the calendar further ahead. So what this is doing is giving you a sense for, actually, what's the competition like? Are there already people creating products for the marketplace I want to be in? I think that's one of the easiest ways to do that. The second part of your question in terms of where to get rent-to-rent agreements from. So students that work in my mentorship program, I tend to share our contracts with them. We've paid a lot of money to have them drafted from solicitors and tweaked over the years as things have changed. We've added certain things in there to them, and we tend to share them with our mentees. I would recommend you don't just kind of try and download something on the internet or just get something from somebody else. Just speak to a solicitor. You'll pay anything from a few £100 or possibly £1,000, £1,200 for a rent-to-rent type agreement. There's 2 types. One is a lease and the other one is a management agreement. Depending on how you want to set up and which way you want to operate, there are different types of documents that you would use. But think about them as also like an insurance policy. You could agree something and just write a few lines out in a Word document, print it out, and then just you sign it, the landlord signs it, you've got something there. Now, if you have a great relationship and nothing ever goes wrong, that's fine, that will do the job. The reality is the documents are drafted in such a way to protect you and to protect your landlord as well. So what that means is, let's say there's an issue, a problem arises, what do you do in that situation? Just like an insurance policy, hopefully you'll put that document away and never need to use it. But if you ever end up in a situation where there is an issue and you do need to revert back to what is it we agreed we would do under this circumstance. So let's say there's a leak in one of the bedrooms. How do you deal with that? Is that the landlord's responsibility? Is it your responsibility? How many days is it going to be sitting with the landlord before you're allowed to jump in and do something about it if they haven't dealt with it? Access, can the landlord access to deal with repairs? When can that be done? All these things are drafted into your agreement, which is why I think it's important to make sure an agreement is drafted correctly by a professional so that you don't have any issues. It's like an insurance policy. You wouldn't go and buy your insurance policy of some guy selling them out of his dodgy coat and say, I've got all these policies available, which one would you like? Oh, you'd go to insurance broker, make sure you've got insurance that's covered. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, if you bought some insurance that isn't quite right, God forbid, in a situation where you need to make a claim, what happens? That insurance becomes null and void. They're not going to pay out. It's a waste of time and a waste of money doing it. In the same way, you need to make sure you protect yourself and protect your landlord as well in that transaction. So hopefully that makes sense. So how are we doing for time? Right. So what we'll do one more question before we finish. And I've got a few more questions that haven't been able to get answered, so I'll make sure I jump onto those first next Monday. If you want your questions answered, make sure you get them in early, so I'll just work through them in the order that they arrive. So this is from Mohammed Nadeem. This is on YouTube. Hi, how can I get in touch with you? I would like to joint venture. Joint adventure you put. I think you mean joint venture. We'll go with a joint. I'm okay for adventure, but we go for joint venture. So ultimately, the way I work, and you need to think about criteria in terms of how you work, not just Nadeem, but other people are listening right now. If you want to work with other people, think about how do you want that to work. So ultimately, what I do, and I'll give you my my elevator pitch, if you like. What I do is I use my time, skill, and experience, and I find fantastic property investment opportunities, and I partner with people who have the cash to fund those deals, and then we share the profit. So that elevator pitch, very quickly in a few seconds, tells you exactly what I do. Essentially, I'm doing all the work. I'll find the deal, I'll renovate it, I'll oversee it. I'll be responsible for the whole thing, and I'm looking to work with somebody who can fund those deals. So I tend to have a criteria of a minimum of £300,000 to work on a joint ventures with me, and there to be a number of deals. So that rules a lot of people out. It's only people that are in that position to do that. It's only because that I'm not able to do so many of these type of deals. The other way you might want to work with somebody is somebody's lending money to you, for example. That's more of a loan. It's a fixed amount of money for a fixed period for a fixed return. That's another way working with other people. So, and they tend to be the two ways I tend to work with investors. So one of them is I'm mentoring and supporting people in that way. The other way, if they're investing with me, it tends to be either a loan or a joint venture. So it keeps it really simple in terms of how I work. So hopefully that helps. Let me know in your comments if this is making sense, this is useful, you're finding this helpful, do you want me to continue doing these? Because if you are, I'd be more than happy to carry on doing these on Monday evenings at 8:30. If on the other hand, you're not really finding these useful, hey, there's no point in me doing these, and I'll switch to doing some other kind of videos. So thank you again so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next Monday. Thank you.